Good morning, brothers, and welcome to Smoking with the Nupes. My name is Brother Darryl Stevens, and this is Brother Erick Pullian. Today, we're going to attempt to give you a little insight on how smoking meats is done. So, Erick, tell me, what is the name of this particular smoker, and what is the basic principle of operation?
So the smoker you're referring to is made by a company called Tech, and it is what we call a pellet smoker. And so by that, its source of heat and energy is made from these wood pellets that are produced at these lumber yards, and they take wood and they compress it into these pellets. There are some advantages and some disadvantages to a smoker like this. So what I like about it is that it's very convenient. So I can pick a temperature, plug it in, and it'll maintain that temperature. I don't have to think about the food the rest of the day. What I don't like about it is that for me, it produces a very, very mild smoke flavor. And so what I've done is that I've modified it to intensify the smoke when I want to. And so I've done that two ways. I put what you call there's a tube on the side that you'll see that I can actually burn wood and lump charcoal in, and then it uses I believe it's called the Venturi effect to blow that smoke into the pellet grill itself. And then I also have what you call these tubes that I can put that I can fill with wood pellets, and I can just insert them directly into the grill. And both of those are what we call cold smokers. The nice thing about smoking, as you know, is that you not only can use hot smoked meat, but I can cold smoke cheese, I can cold smoke bacon, tons of food, especially in the wintertime when you don't want to put heat on food.
Gotcha.
There are a number of manufacturers on the market. Tech is just one. Probably a name that most people watching would be the most familiar with would be a company called Traeger. They are probably one of the earliest people to sort of successfully commercialize pellet grills, and now, like I said, there are a whole host of options on the market for those.
Let me ask you this. I've heard the name offset smoker used. What's the difference between a pellet smoker and an offset?
So an offset smoker, so think about this. So you have your place where the meat sits, right? An offset smoker means that the fire or the energy source is offset, it's on the side.
Okay.
And so think about when, if you purchase ribs from, somebody on the street, one of those big vendors where they have those big trailers that usually they pull behind, those are usually offset smokers. And a lot of competition smokers will use offset smokers. Aaron Franklin, who is huge, probably the best brisket smoker, or one of the best brisket smokers in the country, uses offset smokers. Most of your large restaurants use offset smokers. They're very labor intensive, but they impart probably, if you're thinking about smoking, they probably impart the most purest form of smoke, if I can use that term, to food.
Okay. So now, last thing before we go to the next smoker, roughly, Erick, about what's the price range of a smoker like this?
So a smoker like that, and so there's some things, right? You sort of pay for what you get, so you want to make sure that you're buying something of high quality. You could probably expect to spend anywhere from $1,200 to $2,100 for a good pellet smoker.
Okay. Let's go to the egg. And I like to refer to it as the egg because that's the shape of it, basically. So talk to us about this one. What's the name of the brand, and tell us the characteristics.
So the smoker you're calling an egg, it's interesting. So it's actually called, the type of smoker it's a Kamado ceramic grill. The technology has been around for generations. I believe it originates from somewhere in the South Pacific. I'm not sure if it's Japan or Okinawa, but somewhere in the South Pacific. And the reason you mentioned egg, you say it's because of the shape, but the first company to sort of successfully commercialize that called it the big green egg. And so that's what people sort of tend to refer to these types of grills as. And so Big Green Egg, they dominated the market for, I don't know, for probably a decade or two, but now another brand that's just as popular and probably one that I prefer to over Green Egg is something called Kamado Joe. And those are usually bright red, so Big Green Eggs are green, hence the name, and Kamado Joes are red. I don't have either of those brands. What I have is something called a Monolith, which is built by a German manufacturer. And there are some reasons why I went this direction over Kamado Joe or Green Egg. I'm happy with it, and you can expect to spend on a grill like this probably between $1,800 to about $3,000.
Okay.
Depending on what accessories you're looking for and the size you get and whatnot. They do make smaller versions. All the manufacturers probably have at least three sizes.
Right. Well, these smokers that you have here are probably the type of smoker that somebody experienced cook like you would invest in initially. When I started out smoking, the smoker that I have is called the Weber Smoky Mountain, and that is made by Weber, which is known for grills and cooking apparatus. What's nice about the Weber Smoky Mountain, Eric, is that it's an entry-level smoker, although it produces very good smoking.
Well, let me disagree with you a little bit. You say entry level, and I would argue that
Only from the price standpoint.
from the price that you never have to get another smoker. You can keep that Weber Smoky Mountain forever. I mean, there are cooks all over the country who swear up and down by a Weber Smoky Mountain.
Absolutely.
So you made a fantastic choice. And again, it's not entry level. It's more reasonably priced, but in
Right.
terms of the product that it puts out, you don't need anything.
Absolutely. The Weber Smoky Mountain comes in three sizes. There's a 14-inch, there's an 18-inch, and then there's a 22-inch. And obviously the difference between each one of those is the size of the cooking surface that's involved. It's a charcoal type of smoker. They're really very low maintenance. However, they're strictly manual. You don't, as it comes basic, you just put in your charcoal and you operate it through the vents. That's how you get it hotter or milder.
Which is similar to the Kamado grill. So there's a vent on the bottom and the top. So these things need airflow. That's how you control the heat and the fire.
Right.
And I didn't mention this, but this actually uses lump charcoal, not standard briquettes. And there's a difference in the two. But like I said, the Smoky Mountain, I mean, you never have to go anywhere else. And you made a solid choice. And there's some other smokers out there. You have vertical stack smokers and things of that nature. I would, based on your budget or based on what you're trying to do, I would definitely take a look at everything on the market before I made a final decision on which way I was going to go.
Right. One more thing I want to mention about this Weber Smoky Mountain before we move on is that I'm a great consumer of YouTube blogs, and that's where you find some of the finest smoking and barbecue chefs in the United States. And I've seen several where you can get your Weber Smoky Mountain modified from a temperature standpoint. Some of them even sell ventilation units that can pump more air in to increase and decrease the temperature. So while I mentioned Weber as being an entry level only from the standpoint of its simplicity, you can get modifications from different manufacturers to help enhance, how that Weber works.
That's the beauty of Weber Smoky Mountains, especially the 22-inch. That's actually 22-inch. There are literally, countless numbers of modifications for that, and any grill that's 22 inches. So like you said, you can add temperature control units. You can turn them into grills that you use for Santa Maria cooking. There's all types of modifications you can do with that 22-inch, and they're all driven by the Smoky Mountain Weber.
Absolutely.
And the Kappa.
Okay. All right. Enough about the grills themselves. Now let's talk a little bit about the rubs and the preparation of the meats. Now today, what we're going to do is we're going to smoke a whole chicken, and we're also going to smoke ribs, and these are pork ribs. So let's talk about some of the rubs, and let's talk about how we prepare the meat for smoking. So let me start out by talking about how I season the chicken. Now, the first thing you want to do with your meat is you want to put a binder on it. And that's interesting too, because you have different people use all different types. There's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of what works best for your particular taste. What I did with this chicken was I used olive oil as the basting agent, and I rubbed it all over top and bottom of the chicken. And I used a couple of these different seasonings. Let me just kind of talk about a couple of these real quick and tell you what goes on here. This one is a Kinder's, and it's a blend of salt, pepper, and garlic. This one is called Southern Heat. It's a southern spice blend that has paprika, mustard, jalapeno, and other spices. This gives a little bit of more of a spicier flavor to the meat. And also, this is a southern barbecue blend, which uses brown sugar, chili powder, cayenne, some other spices. So basically what you want to do is you want to liberally season the chicken. You want to make sure you get underneath, you want to get the wings, you want to get the drumsticks, you want to get the entire chicken. And one of the reasons that I put a lot of seasoning on it initially is because it helps create a nice bark and a nice coating on the meat. So Erick's going to talk about how he prepares his ribs.
Well, let's stay with the chicken for a little bit. So what's nice about cooking is that like when you started off, you said this is how you do it, right?
Right.
So I just want to just talk about how I prepare chicken. So like you, I like the olive oil as the binder. The one thing I do a little differently for my whole chickens is that I will spatchcock them, meaning that I will flip them over and cut the backbone out, break the breastbone, and then I lay them flat.
Ooh, okay.
I lay them flat, and for me, I find that it just cooks a little quicker and a little bit more evenly. And here's the thing about it. So this seasoning right here. So what's nice about a seasoning like this is that you can use this and only this, salt, pepper, garlic, on any meat. Everything else is extra gravy. And so I too usually do exactly what you do, but I like putting real coarse salt on my skin. It sort of helps crisp it up. I tend to go at maybe a 320, 25 on the smoker because I want to make sure that my skin gets crisp. But I mean, you can't go wrong with chicken. The one thing you do have to be mindful of, and this has been my experience, is that there are certain meats that take up smoke a little more easier than others, and chicken and fish are one of them. So you got to be mindful of what woods you use for chicken. So today for the chicken, we are going to be using. I have some pear, some fruit woods. I have some pear and some mulberry. I stayed away from the hickory and the mesquite and things of that nature. For the ribs, it's just the opposite. We're going to be using a host of fruit woods, and then we're going to add some hickory in there as well. And those will be added via the modification that I have on the side of the smoker.
One more thing I want to add about the chicken now. I've seen a lot of guys in their blogs lift the skin away and put the seasoning underneath the skin. Now, I didn't do that this morning just because I was trying to get it ready and just make it simplistic.
Yeah.
But you'll get guys that will swear by pulling the skin back gently and putting the seasoning underneath, and also putting an abundance of seasoning in the cavity as well.
Yeah. So I often do that, and so when you spatchcock it, a nice access point is right here, and you can sort of put that rub right under there, and the skin will just lay right back flat over top of it.
Absolutely.
So the ribs. So these are St. Louis style ribs. They've already been been washed. I haven't trimmed them yet. I'll trim them. We're going to be making bacon crusted ribs today. So my binder today, and like Darryl mentioned, so you don't have to use a binder. Some people will just sprinkle their rubs right on the meat. Let me tell you what a binder does. A binder does exactly that. It sort of holds the rub on the meat. And depending on the binder that you use, usually it doesn't add anything to the flavor. Even mustard. You think that when you put mustard on meat that you taste the mustard, you don't actually taste it. So my binder will be a mustard base. I actually have 3 mustards in there. I have a spicy, I have a Dijon, and I have a yellow. And then my rubs are going to be, so I go back and forth. I make my own rubs at home, but then I also found out that there are a lot of great commercial rubs on the market as well. So my suggestion is find a rub that you like, that works for you, or make your own, and then take it from there.
Are you using this rub right here, Erick?
I'm using all of those rubs.
Let's talk about these rubs for a second, because these are a little bit different. Talk about this one first.
So this is a company called Oak Ridge Barbecue. They make a fantastic lineup of rubs. You can find them in some specialty stores, but what I like about them is that if you order for them directly online, they're made fresh to order. So unlike most rubs that could be made and sit in the store for months, these guys package them fresh when you order them. And they have a whole host. You know, doesn't matter if you're doing chicken, fish. They have a rub for every occasion. I do like it, and this is one of my go-to rubs.
What's in this one, Erick? Tell me what's in this.
So this rub, raw cane sugar, sea salt, honey chilies, and then a bunch of proprietary blends of other spices. They call this the Dominator Sweet Rub. It's actually what some people use for competition, and literally you could just use this and nothing else. But I am going to blend the rubs today.
Let me ask a question about this particular rub. Is this rub specific or work better with specific meats, or is it just a all-purpose general rub?
So for me, since this is a sweet rub, I would only use this. I would not use this on beef or lamb.
Okay.
All right. So for me, sweet rubs are more for pork, and sometimes chicken.
Okay.
But mainly for pork.
Okay. Let's briefly talk about these other rubs that you have here, so people can get an idea.
So you mentioned YouTube channels, and this is a brand I first came across. I think the name of this, I'll tell you the name of them later, but the name of this rub is Killer Hogs, and it's just a basic paprika-based pork rub. I mean, and for the most part, all rubs are generally the same. You're going to have paprika, you're going to have salt, pepper, garlic, and things of that nature. This isn't any different. It's just this person's version of it, and I will blend this as well. I also have just some coarse salt that I smoked myself, and so there are 3 different types of salts in here that I cold smoked, and I will put a nice little layer of salt before I put my rub on there, my other rubs.
Wow. Okay. Excellent. So we've already done the chicken. So I guess at this point, Erick, let's let you start to prepare your ribs.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we have 3 slabs of ribs. As I mentioned, St. Louis cut. And for those of you who don't know, so these ribs all start off as spare ribs, and they've been sort of cut in this rectangular shape, and that's where we get the name St. Louis style or St. Louis cut. What I am going to do is this last piece here. I could try to trim this fat off. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim a little bit of it off, and then sacrifice those last 2 bones. So now I have a nice shaped rib. So let's talk about the prepping of the rib. So, you know, you're going to go through and you're going to find pieces of fat, and you're going to trim that off. But the one thing I want to talk about is the membrane. So there are multiple options with the membrane. What most people do is remove it. The second most popular option is to score it, and then the third is to leave it on. And the reason you pull the membrane or you score it is because, unlike the rest of the meat or the rest of the fat, heat does not render this membrane. It will be exactly the way it is at the end of the cook as it is at the beginning of the cook, and so it'll be chewy. And some people just don't like that texture in their mouth. So I will remove it, and the way I do it is I sort of take a butter knife, and doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong way. You can start on one end or the other end. I have a tendency I like to start on this end. You sort of get under the membrane. Now, the membranes are a little slippery. So what I like to do is just take a napkin. Once I get it started, grab it.
That pulls right off.
Now I do have a little bit left. I'm going to actually trim this off as well. So the way I'm going to prep ribs today is I'm going to use a mustard-based binder. And what I like to do is, as I prep a side, and I always start with the bone side up, is I actually put it on the surface that that I'm going to cook it on. Because I found that if you put rubs here and turn them over, 2/3 of the rub is going to be stuck to the prep tray. So as I prep this, it will then go right to where it's going to cook, and then I'll prep the top side. And so what I'll do, this is a mustard-based binder.
What's in this, Eric?
So I have yellow mustard, Dijon mustard, spicy brown mustard, a little bit of maple syrup, and that's it.
Okay.
And so this, and believe it or not, these ribs are not going to taste like they've been covered in mustard. I promise you, you won't even taste the mustard. But what this will do, it'll help give it a nice sweet bark. And as we mentioned, it will hold the rubs. Also, what's important is that if I were going to add heat to these ribs, you want to put them on the bone side, just because of how the human mouth experiences heat or hotness. This is probably where I would want to put that. So if I was putting red pepper flakes or things of that nature, I'd add them here. So I'm going to liberally
So Eric, while you're doing this, describe for everyone what is the bark.
So you don't usually use that term with ribs, and I did today. The bark is usually associated when you're cooking pork shoulders or pork butts. I'm good for now. Pork shoulders or pork butts, or beef. And what it is that it's the crust that's created from your rubs. And usually it's if you're doing beef, it's a real nice dark brown or even black. This is actually a rub that I made, even though it's in the Killer Hogs bottle, and it's all paprika, yellow mustard, brown sugar, the things that garlic powder that you normally have in rubs. And then I'm going to use the competition rub. Darryl, would you mind passing that to me, please?
Sure.
The competition rub. Open it for me, please. And this really has a nice flavor as well. And so So for these ribs, the bacon will be smoked separately and then added to the ribs, probably when there's just an hour left in the cook.
So Erick's gonna put the ribs and the bacon on the pellet smoker now. So Erick, kind of describe this contraption that you have here with the racks and tell me, how it works and how you go about doing this.
So this was something that I found because we like to entertain a lot, and I like to cook in huge volumes. And before I had the second smoker, all I had was the pellet grill, and I needed more surface area.
Okay.
And so this was a way. This allowed me to sort of to be able to stack my cooks, so I can do wings, fish, whatever. I can fit 5 racks on here. And you may wonder, well, why am I putting it in the pan? You can see that this pan has holes in it, so the smoke will come through. So the bottom of the ribs will just as smoky as the top of the ribs. And so I'm actually going to put this here, and then I'm going to add a third rack. We're actually going to take the bacon from here and put that on top of the third rack. And so as the bacon cooks, the fat will also render down and get on the ribs as well.
So Erick, talk about the temperature control on this one. What's the temperature and what's the estimated cook time on this?
That's a great question. So there are different ways to cook ribs. There's 3, 2, 1, 2, 2, and basically what I'm doing today is we're putting these ribs on at about 215, and I'm probably going to let them go to for about I guess maybe 4 or 5 hours, and then I'll assess it. And what I'm going to look for is I'm going to look to see how the meat looks. So I want that meat to be pulling back off the bone. I very rarely probe my ribs. After you do this long enough, you sort of know when things are done, and I'll be able to eyeball it and figure out when they're done. And in terms of temperature, so Darryl and I were talking about this earlier, it depends on how much time I have. If I have less time, I'll go with a hotter cook. If I have more time, I'll go with a slower, longer cook. So there's no temperature that I'm married to, although I do prefer the lower, but I've gone high too.
Erick, talk
or
about...
I'll do a Texas cheat and I'll wrap them in foil if I need.
That's exactly what I want. Expand on wrapping versus unwrapping and kind of tell me what your philosophy is about that.
So wrapping versus non-wrapping. So there's the world's divided into 2 halves, generally speaking. And some people like, and I'm talking not only about pork but also briskets as well. Mm-hmm. When it reaches a certain point, they like to wrap them either in foil or a pink butcher's paper. Mm-hmm. I always wrap my brisket. And I wait until it hits like around. So brisket, what happens when you cook brisket? It'll come up to temperature and then it'll stall usually. And by that it means it'll hit maybe like 165 or 170, and it'll stay there for 4 to 5, 6 hours before it breaks through that temperature and starts to climb up to your done temperature of about 200 to 205. Ribs, on the other hand, when you wrap them, it greatly changes the texture and the flavor of the meat. So if I were to wrap these, what I would do is that I would take some foil. On the bottom of the foil, I'd load butter, brown sugar, honey, maple syrup, and more rub, and I would put the ribs meat down, and then I'd fold the foil over real tight, and I'd probably put them back on here and let them go for another 2 hours. So now the ribs are actually steaming in there, right? And maybe a little apple juice too. The ribs are now steaming in that foil, so that's going to increase or shorten your cook time. Then you take them out and they're going to be wet. Then they have to go back on the smoker to sort of maybe dry out a little bit, and then once they came off, you sort of re-rub them. That's a real popular way. But like we've been saying, there is no right or wrong way to doing this. I was telling Darryl earlier, I said I always have the pizza place on speed dial, because cooking to me is like an art. And my one takeaway for people who are watching this is don't be afraid to experiment.
Absolutely.
It's only food if you get it wrong and you mess up, you order a pizza and call it a day. And I've ordered lots of pizzas in my days, trust me.
Well, what I did last week, I did baby back ribs on my Weber Smoky Mountain. Mm-hmm. And what I did was, I did something kind of similar to what you described. I cooked the ribs by themselves for 2 hours.
Okay.
Then what I did was,
I wrapped it. What temperature?
It was basically about 275.
275, okay.
And what I did was, I let them cook for 2 hours. then I took them off and I wrapped them, and I did the same exact procedure that you did. You put butter, you put brown sugar, honey, and then I put apple juice in at the bottom, because you want that liquid to steam and moisturize the meat, tenderize the meat. And then I put it on for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
Then after that, I took them out and put them back on the grill by themselves for another hour.
Yep. So
and they just turned out fantastic. I didn't eat them. I'm not a pork eater, but my wife told me that they were the best ribs she had ever eaten, and she's eaten a lot of pork in her day, so I think that was a pretty good endorsement. So,
one more thing about this pellet smoker that I didn't mention. So the way this pellet smoker works is, so when the temperatures are low, right? There's an auger in here, and it continuously feeds pellets in, and that's where the smoke is generated. If I were to go too high on this temperature, let's say I set it like 300, then it basically becomes an oven. You don't get as many pellets moving in, so you don't really get any smoke flavor when you go up on the high temperatures. So for this, I like to keep this no higher than 220 or 230.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
But I have modified it so if I did go higher, I could add smoke.
Gotcha.
Right. There's a little piece on the side here. Then I have a tube that I would add.
One of the things that, and I don't know if you do it on the egg, but with my Weber Smoky Mountain, what I do is I use actual wood chunks in with the charcoal to enhance the flavor.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned some of the wood pellets that you can get. Some of the wood chunks you can get are that I've been using have been mesquite, maple, pecan, a lot of those types of wood you can get almost anywhere.
Yeah.
And basically you would place 3 to 4 chunks strategically around the base of where the charcoal is laying at the bottom of the Weber Smoky Mountain. And that adds really good flavor to all the meats.
So for this, I do the same thing. So for me, whenever I'm smoking on this, I like layering flavors. So I will have, my standard go-to is I'll have mulberry, peach, pear, maple, and red oak on all my non fish cooks.
Okay.
And sometimes if I'm doing wings, I do like to put a little bit more smoky flavor on those, but for whole chicken I won't. And then, because your fruit woods are usually milder, and then I'll pick either a hickory or a mesquite, because that's real strong flavors. I'll pick one of those to pair with those woods.
Okay.
And so in this one, I mentioned I just have just the mulberry and the pear for your whole chicken.
And where do you get those woods? Do you order them?
No. So it's funny. In years past, I was ordering from California for redwood, but now I have a friend who can get me redwood from someplace down in Norfolk.
Okay.
But for the most part, I go to an orchard, Linvilla, out there in Chester County. They have any kind of wood you can think of. They have the trees, and they cut them down, and for $20, you get a crate about this big, full of wood chunks. I very rarely use wood chips. For me, it's chunks.
Same with me. I use the chunks as well. They smoke longer and you get a better effect.
Okay, so we're getting ready to put Brother Stevens' chicken on the monolith. But unlike most grills, you just can't lift open a Kamado style grill, because what happens is that all that extra air could cause a flare up. So what you do with all Kamado style grills is that you crack them first and then you lift up.
So Eric has this set at 300, and normally at that temperature you're probably looking at between 2.5 to 3 hours cook time. I normally cook on my Weber between 250 and 275, and I usually do wings. I've never cooked a whole chicken, but it's normally about 3 hours, or like 165 or something like that internal temperature.
Yeah, so for me, when I'm cooking chicken, internal temperature is probably the most important thing for me as well,
Right,
because you
right,
don't want people to come
right.
over your house and get sick, right?
That's correct. That's correct. Internal temperature is what you probably want to look at more so in terms of time, because there could be other conditions, windy, different things like that that might affect, speeding up or slowing down the cooking process. So I would suggest everybody get one of these digital meat thermometers. They work extremely well. They're very accurate. You simply just hit the button and you hit whether you want Fahrenheit or Celsius. And when you get to the end of your cook, you just want to insert it in the meatiest part and make sure that you have that temperature that you want. For the chicken, we're going to be looking for 165.
Okay, so we're here at almost at the end of the process. So the chicken is done. The only thing left for this is to cut it, and it cooked roughly about 3 hours. We got it up to temp. Now, traditionally, when people cut chickens like this, the old-fashioned way is to sort of cut it the way you would. I'm not going to cut it. Is to cut it the way you would a turkey, right? But what I found a better way to do it is to cut both the legs and wings off, and then what you want to do is you actually want to take the whole breast out. So you cut down the breastbone that way, and then remove the breast, and then put it on the table, and then cut across the grain. What you'll find is that the meat is a little bit more tender. For the ribs, what we're going to do now is, so the bacon was smoked along with the ribs. I'm going to cut the bacon in the small pieces, put another light dusting of rub on here, put sauce on top, put the bacon on the sauce, and then the ribs will go back into the smoker for another half an hour to 45 minutes. Well, Brother Stevens, we're at the end of the day. The chicken is done, cut. It was delicious. Here are the bacon crusted ribs. Interestingly enough, we used a sauce today that neither of us have ever used before. It's called Sienna sauce. This young lady was on Shark Tank a few weeks ago, and Brother Alan, who also saw the show, purchased it and brought it over for us to use on our ribs. So interested to see how it's going to taste.
And point out, African American.
Black owned, African American owned. I believe this young lady started this business in her house with her mom. She may be somewhere, she's either a mid-teen, 14, 15, 16 years old, and so we're trying to support her. So here's to Smoking with the Nupes. I hope you enjoyed the rest of Kappa Week.
Fa Nupes.